Welcome to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you and hope that today's episode is one that will have you coming back for more. And if you're a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, as always, I welcome you back and hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and as always, insightful. So before we get to the main event, for my people who are watching from YouTube, please make sure you hit the red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes of the podcast. If you're listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other audio platforms, make sure you subscribe there as well. And of course, for people that want to donate to this platform and help us continue to grow, you could do that in 4 ways. If you are using Cash App, you can use our handle, $IDTALK4ED. If it's Venmo, you can use our handle @KwameSM. PayPal, you can use the URL paypal.me/KwameSM. And then for those who would like to get behind the scenes footage of what we do on this podcast and all things Identity Talk, as well as some other perks to show our appreciation for the support you've given us over the past 5 years, you can become a patron today by going to our Patreon page. Just type in my name, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, or Identity Talk for Educators, and it should pop right up. And then to catch new and old episodes of the podcast, you can go to our main website at IDTALK4EDucators.com. And then for my book lovers who need to add to their 2025 list, make sure you add Learn to Relearn as part of that list. It's been out for a few months, and I want to thank all of the people who have been supporting this book from November on, people who have left reviews, people who have done selfies with the book, people who have shared the book with their colleagues and friends and loved ones. All the support is appreciated, and I thank you so much. And for those who have not yet purchased a copy, it's not too late. You can go directly to the Routledge website or all other book retail platforms where they do sell the book. And for those who have read the book and you love what you read, I'd greatly appreciate it if you left a 5-star review on either Amazon, Goodreads, or wherever you leave reviews for the books that you read. And then, of course, to learn more about Learning to Relearn, you can go to the main website, learningtorelearn.com, and you'll be able to receive more information about the book and the other content within. Thank you again. And we are here. Main event. So we have another great guest that's going to be joining us today. I've had the honor of being a speaker at her conference through her organization, Q10 Equity in Education International Conference, been able to do it for 2 years. And I've had a chance to learn more about her work in education and leadership and the work that she still continues to do to this day. And we're going to have her come on and share about her journey and all that's come with it. So without wasting any more time, I want to bring on Dr. Talisa Sullivan to the podcast to talk with us about her journey and what brought her here today. So let's bring Dr. Talisa on. Hello.
Hello.
How are we?
You know what? All is well. I'm good. I'm thriving. I'm excited.
Yes. And I know we just saw each other not too long ago, so it's good to be together again for another conversation.
Absolutely. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. I love the platform. I love the intro. This is really good.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to dig right in because there's so many questions I have to ask you, and I know the listeners and viewers want to learn more about you as well. So a question that I always start my guests with is a pretty open-ended one, and it's one that lays the foundation for the conversation we're about to have. So question for you, who or what inspired you to want to even do this thing that we love called education? Where did it all start for you?
Well, I'm going to say it all started, and I don't know that it was a direct, like intentional influence, but my mom was in, home daycare. But prior to that, she actually worked at a few daycare facilities where she was the director, assistant director. And I always went with her, like, especially in the summer. And so I think indirectly, that's where I got my start from. I saw a lot, I helped a lot. And then when she transitioned and opened her own home daycare, she would call me her assistant director. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I know I was doing a lot. In between, starting with from middle school all the way to high school, I would help out after school. And then transitioning to college, I would come home during breaks and help, organize things and set things up at the daycare. And then from there, just digging in and going right into education. So that's where my inspiration came from.
All right, it's good to know. And I know growing up in California, and you've been there pretty much your whole life, so that's all you know, and other places as well. But I'm interested in learning about your time in K to 12. So before you were Dr. Talisa, you were just Talisa growing up in Cali, going through the system. And I'm interested in learning about how you saw yourself in terms of your identity, and if there were any challenges in showing up as your full self.
Yeah, lots of challenges. Thank you for bringing that up and taking me back. A lot of times when I speak, I will start with a story, kind of, I like stories. I usually will start around about high school because I actually graduated from high school with below 2.0 GPA. And I had a little bit of a struggle, there. And so I will say that what I thought about myself was I didn't think I was smart, but that was accompanied by others thinking the same thing. And so I can't remember the details, but there's a conversation where I know that some of my sister's friends will be like, oh, it's a good thing your sister's cute because she's not smart, stuff like that. Just hearing those things didn't really bother me. I have pretty thick skin. So I would be like, ooh, they think I'm cute. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, okay, at least I'm cute. I ain't got to be smart if I'm cute, right? Not realizing that those things actually had impact, and they had a negative impact on the way I saw myself and the way I carried myself and what I even believed that I could actually do. And so I had to really counter those things by, growth mindset. If you read any of Carol Dweck's work, knowing that, mindset is something that we can actually develop, or intelligence is not fixed, and that we can actually learn more as we continue to dig into more content. So that, and I also will transition to say, when I was in high school with that GPA, I had one teacher I remember, his name was Mr. Browning. And I remember him saying, you're a great writer, you're smart, this. And I was like, wait, me? So those types of things. So just like having that one or two people to say that you are smart and that you can write and that you are good at something kind of adds to your esteem and brings you to self actualize in a different way other than what the narrative has been. So those are just some of the challenges having, and then my identity, how I viewed myself, and some of the struggles. I had a lot of this may not necessarily connect with the academic identity, but I had a lot of challenges with my hair. So I had some insecurities as far as my hair. Just a lot of people, I would want it to be straightened and things like that. And so as you see now, I'm locked. So natural is where I transitioned to. So lots of struggles growing up in K-12 and in the system. So
yes. And it looks like there's sister locks.
Sister locks, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
How long you had them?
Well, I have had them since 2020. I actually started going natural in 2015. So I have not cut my hair or any of that since 2015. And then I was just kind of wearing a natural, like if I showed you pictures, I was like, why didn't somebody tell me I needed to do something different? But anyway, I was in that stage. And then when the pandemic hit, I looked at that as a great opportunity for less questions. Because a lot of times when we change our hair, people have so many questions, and I'm like, I just want to go and be. And so I was like, ooh, this is a perfect opportunity. And so I started locking in 2020.
Yeah. So I know when people decide to go natural, there's always some anticlimactic point that causes them to go that route, or something compelling that happened that just told them, all right, I need to do this. It's time. So I don't know what that moment was for you when you decided, all right, it's time to go this route and go on this journey.
This is such a perfect question for this talk for education, because I was on the Underground Railroad tour, which is exactly what it sounds like. That was the first that I started going natural, was on the Underground Railroad tour, which happens right out of San Bernardino, California. A lot of the educators in the area, get together on this tour, and it's hosted by Footsteps to Freedom. Dr. Paulette Hines Brown, or Brown Hines, and Hardy Brown are really instrumental in this. And they put on a tour for educators to go and explore the footsteps that the enslaved Africans took to freedom. And so I've had several opportunities to go on this tour since, but the very first one was in 2015. That was the first start of my natural journey. And it just kind of took me back to figuring out, like, who am I and how do I feel? How do I show up my best self? I did not realize, because I had never stepped in public with my natural hair, never would have before 2015. I didn't realize that this is part of me that I was putting, like, I was like, okay, let me hurry up and let me change this so that people won't see that side, but why? And so now I put it on, like, graciously, this is who I am. And this makes me feel more like me. So 2015, Footsteps to Freedom.
So from 2015 on, what changes have you experienced either personally or professionally? Now you can go either direction with this question, because I know what it meant for me to start locking up my hair. And this is going on, I think next week or 2 weeks from now, it'll be 14 years with this hair. So 14 years, started as suit, maybe halfway through my first year of teaching, and I've just been growing it ever since. So I'm wondering how it's changed you in that way.
You know what? This is such a perfect conversation. I will say, and I'm glad you're asking this question, because I would not normally have the platform or the opportunity to actually discuss how this has changed who I am and what this has done. Again, I feel more like me. I didn't know I didn't feel like me, but I feel more like me. But the change, actually a sense of security, a sense of self-confidence. And a lot of that comes from more than just my own sense of self-confidence. And I cannot make this up when I say every single day that I step into the public with this hair, I get multiple compliments. And it's not just from Black people, but from white people, from like Asian people, from, Native, just from everyone. And it really does build a sense of self-confidence because others are accepting. And even though I think I'm pretty okay with others not accepting who I am, the reality is we all, I don't want to say fiend for that acceptance, but we all look to that acceptance from society, because this is where we live. And this is how we survive. So it has really contributed to my self-confidence and my sense of self, my sense of transcendence and self-actualization too.
And does a part of you also feel like this goes back to what you just mentioned about not getting those compliments when you were younger and being teased when you were a kid? So to now be an adult and get these compliments, it almost feels like a sense of not redemption, but more so it's like a sense of confirmation that I've always been this. I've always looked this good. But now I believe it because other people are now affirming that.
Yes, that's why affirmations are so important through and through public education, private education, leadership, teaching, leading. Affirmations. I'm huge with affirmations. I love to affirm people because it's important for people to have that sense of self-worth that others are affirming them as well. So yes, absolutely. And also redemption. You know what I mean? So
yeah, for sure. So now I want to get into your professional journey. So you're here mainly because you are an educator. So before you got into leadership, were you in the classroom? What subjects were you teaching?
So yes, I actually started as a teacher in Los Angeles Unified School District. And another story I have is I actually applied for, so I got my teaching credential after pausing for a moment because I didn't quite finish and didn't really understand the system. And then I was going back to get my teaching credential. And so before I was getting my teaching credential, actually, I was getting a job and I was offered a job contingent upon receiving my bachelor's degree. So that was before teaching credential. And so I walked onto this campus. I'm interviewing for the first time for a position in Español, así, solamente nivel uno. So I'm bilingual, so I do speak Spanish. And so I'm going for this this is first year teacher going for this position. And the interview panel interviews me. And the principal says, thank you so much. And, we're going to, move forward. And so unfortunately, the panel's looking for someone with a little bit more of a language skills, And so he says, take a walk with me. I said, okay. So I take a walk with him and I'm like, he's not offering me the job. Why are we taking a walk? This is what I was thinking. And so he goes, I'm going to tell you something in this interview. What I realize about you is that you have something that cannot be taught. The rest of that, you're going to learn. He was like, so I think the panel will forgive me for offering you this position. Wow. And so I started my teaching career on that. And he brought me in as a first-year teacher teaching Spanish level 1. The panel actually wanted a native speaker because the following year they were going to be offering courses for native speakers, and none of them wanted to teach it. They just wanted to teach what they were teaching, but they wanted someone who could come in and start this program. And of course, that wasn't me because my language skills were so developing, right? And so that was my first teaching job. So I taught Spanish level 1. Eventually, when I ended up getting my teaching credential, I ended up getting my teaching credential in health science. So I taught Spanish level 1 and health science. And then I was also an activities director. So I was teaching leadership to students. And so that was my beginning teaching career before transitioning into administration. So teacher at heart.
Hi friends, it's me, Thaddeus from Thaddeus Nature Notebook. Are you loving our journey into the wild and learning all about awesome animals? Then don't forget to subscribe. You can find Thaddeus Nature Notebook on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Just hit that subscribe button and never miss a new episode. And if you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and leave a comment about your favorite animal. Thanks for listening and exploring nature with me. Let's keep discovering together. Now back to my daddy's cell.
Wow. That's an amazing story. And it's not often when somebody from an interview panel pulls you to the side and says, hey, I know what the rubric says, and I know what we just saw might not align with what the rubric's saying, but you have some intangibles that we can work with. And I honestly believe that's the essence of teaching. They're just certain things that you just cannot teach somebody. If they have that it factor and you're able to recognize it, you have to find ways to maximize it. So kudos to that panelist who had enough wherewithal to say, yeah, you may not have had the best interview, but guess what? There's something there that we can work with, and I want to put you in the best position to be successful.
Yeah, and that actually started my career, and it actually started my mindset on anything I do. Please believe that I'm looking for what cannot be taught. And that's how I live my life. And anytime I have an opportunity to interview and have influence over the interview process, I'm looking for more than just the skill set. So some people come with skills, some people come with that it factor that you mentioned, and some people come with both. So as I'm looking to see who's going to be on my team, I want to know who has what can't be taught. And if I have that candidate that has what can't be taught and they have the skill, oh, that's a perfect marriage. But if I have a candidate with skill and then nothing, no substance, and they don't have that it factor, I don't know what I'm going to do with someone with all the skill that doesn't have the factor to be able to work with people, right? That doesn't have the emotional intelligence and the human-centered, interactions. I don't necessarily know what to do with that individual because I can't teach you those things. But what I can teach you is I can teach you about a lesson plan. I can teach you about time manage. I can teach you about classroom management. I can teach you a lot of those things. I cannot teach you to connect indefinitely with our students, with our staff, with our leaders. So those are some things that particular instance taught me and that I will take with me on any journey I go on.
So since we're there, let's talk about that, because we are here to talk about leadership, but more specifically, I want to talk about servant leadership, something that you talk about extensively in the work that you do. And when I think about this term servant leadership, I think we've gone through our careers respectively where you have some school leaders who serve students and also faculty members, but also the greater community that the school's surrounded by. And then there's some that are more of like system leaders. They're put in that position to just keep the ship steady, if you will. They focus more on the operation the operational aspects of the job and not so much the growing of well-being of students and faculty members. And I feel like I've had both types of those leaders throughout my own career.
Mhm.
So when we talk about servant leadership, how do you personally define that in what you do? And why do you see that as being impactful in different educational settings?
Well, thank you for asking that question. Yeah, with servant leadership, leading with heart. And as you're leading with the heart, you're ensuring that you are looking out for the well-being of those that you serve. We all go into this to serve our students. That's first and foremost. In addition to that, there are some of us that are designated to serve our staff and our teachers and our teacher leaders and, adults, right? So we have to keep those in mind as well. And so providing them with the support that's necessary. When I talk about servant leadership, it's beyond just, providing them with a platform, a place, a classroom. It's the above and beyond. It is the teacher needs some level of, support in order to get their jobs done, in order to ensure that they are working towards making an impactful, meaningful, engaging atmosphere for our students. And so we're here to provide whatever's necessary in order to ensure that that happens. Going above and beyond, offering coaching, not just me being the coach if I'm the leader of that institution or that organization, giving them an additional coach so that way, if there's something that they're not comfortable coming to me with, it's just like we work with our own children. Like I would hope my daughter would come to me for any and everything under the sun. The reality is she always didn't. So providing her with another individual or someone else that she can actually go to, if in case she doesn't feel the comfort to come to me, that's part of my servant leadership. And that's something I do for my staff. It's like, not only are you receiving coaching from me, but you're also going to have an outside coach. So that way, if there are those things that you're like, I'm trying to navigate Dr. Sullivan's, operational style, and I don't quite get it. And I want to come to her and I'm getting to learn her better, but how do I navigate when she's you might not be comfortable asking me that question, but you might be comfortable asking your outside coach. So those are some servant leadership things that I like to do. Providing resources for the community, being available to the community, being available, having an open door policy, responding appropriately to adversity. Those are some servant leadership things that we forget. The hierarchy in our system causes us to sometimes regard other individuals as beneath us. I like to level that playing field and say we're colleagues. Although one of us has to, evaluate the other. That doesn't mean that I'm above you or I'm better than you. I'm worth more than you. That just means that I've been put in a position of authority, and not abusing that authority, but using that authority to offer resources and support. So those are my ideas of servant leadership and how we can best serve our staff, our students, and our community.
And I agree with everything that you said. And as you're mentioning this, I'm thinking about what's happening in our society today, especially sociopolitically. We're in the midst of a very challenging time where we're seeing executive orders being put out there left and right. We're seeing rollbacks in DEI policies. We're also seeing a lot of different political actions that are taking place that are impacting our most vulnerable students in our schools. So thinking about what it means to be a servant leader, but also recognizing that a lot of these leaders operate within school systems that are designed for those same vulnerable communities to not thrive. What shifts do you see in leadership, given what's going on, and how can we prepare those leaders who are still in the trenches of these systems? How can we help them navigate those things that are taking place?
Well, I will say that, over the time that I've been in education, I've seen a shift, and I've seen a shift in both ways. And it just depends on which organization that we're talking about and what organization that we're in. I think we're going more towards definitely transformational leadership, which is something I'm really known for as well. But transformational leadership, just mindsets, shifting mindsets, those types of things. And although we're not quite there yet as a society, I think that more and more organizations are seeing that we have to shift our mindsets in order to provide the certain servant leadership that I just spoke about, and in order to see transformation in our school systems. And when I talk about systems, not just in the school, but the systems that are in the school. We see a lot of historically marginalized youth being impacted by some of the original plans for public education, which is to just provide a cookie cutter plan. That shift in mindset is something that is showing up in leaders across the nation. And I'll say that and outside of the nation, because I've actually worked with a few individuals in different countries as they talk about transformational leadership and wanting to know, how do we best serve our students? How do we best serve our teachers, our teacher leaders? So I definitely see a shift towards transformational leadership and growth mindset. I also see that there are some individuals in some places that are still stagnant. And when I talk about stagnant, it's ingrained in the system. And if it's ingrained in the system that this is not the platform or the time to make that quick change to transformation, then some people are still staying where status quo, and that is, we're serving the majority of our population, and that's sufficient. And those leading organizations are digging deeper and seeing that there are certain populations that are not being served for whatever the reason might be, different reasons, in different organizations. And that's what I've seen. I've worked across Southern California in multiple different capacities, and I also worked with the state on some things. And so what I'm seeing that those individual organizations that are about growth mindset and wanting to see that cultural shift in looking at their student demographics as what's going to mirror their teaching and leading population, those individuals are shifting their mindset to believe that we need to represent the community that we are serving. And so that's kind of what I see. It's tough because of our political climate, because what we don't understand, we're afraid of. So, but there are a lot of organizations that are pushing for transformational leadership.
And I think the word transformation is one of those many terms that unfortunately has been used very loosely in our lexicon. When I'm thinking about transformation means having the understanding that sometimes compliance is just not the way you need to go in order to address the needs of your students.
Right.
But I also believe that we come into the K-12 system thinking that in order to have longevity, you have to be compliant.
Yeah.
You can't deviate from what directives have been given by your district. And I also believe that there are certain leaders who don't want to be that, but also believe that it's the only way for them to stay at their jobs. So when we think about transformational leadership in that context, what advice have you given leaders? And you've done this for a long time. So what kind of advice would you give to a leader that's in that predicament? They want to be transformational, but they also know that, they're towing a line.
Yeah. So with this particular topic and giving people advice about things, it's kind of difficult because I say this all integrity of moving fast, because our kids deserve for us to move fast. We don't have time for them to be marginalized and undervalued and underserved and any of that. We don't have time for that. So right. as I give this advice, I need people to understand that. So the advice is to meet people where they are.
That's right.
And that's kind of it almost sounds like a contradiction to, hey, we got to move fast. We got to go. Our kids deserve, this. The reality is they deserve that. They don't have time. They don't have time for us to wait on people. They don't have time for us to meet people where they are. However, if we don't meet people where they are, then we will never reach that mindset in order to help them to shift. So our job as, I still use the word equity. I know that some people like the word equity means something different for different people. But when I talk about equity, I'm talking about, giving people what they need when they need it. So I'll just use that word, give people what they need when they need it. But in order to do that, we have to meet people where they are, because those people need something too. And so if we want to go fast and we want to provide our students everything that they need in order to be successful, then we have to meet our adults that are working with our students where they are, so that they get an understanding of where they need to be in order to support our learners. Right. And so that advice is meet people where they are and wholeheartedly meet people where they are with no judgment.
And that brings me to my next question, because we are talking about transformational leadership, and you started your own consultancy, Transformational Leadership Consulting Services, where you do a lot of this work with school leaders across the state of California and beyond that.
Yes.
So talk to me about how the consultancy got started, and ultimately, what do you want to achieve through this consultancy?
Okay. So in all transparency, I did not grow up with a business mindset. And I didn't even have a business mindset about 5 years
honestly, ago. How many of us grew up with a business mindset as educators? That's not, we don't go to school for business.
No, and as a matter of fact, like my idea of, serving is in a public institution. My preference, I love serving in a public institution because everyone has access, right? When it's public, everyone has access. I think the challenge with public institutions is that sometimes I don't get to say, like, here, I'm going to say it. Whatever you ask me, I'm going to say it. I'm going to be about it. When you're working for an institution, you're a representative of that institution. And so being mindful, being careful of what you say and what you do, I think that's a good thing anyway. But it's a side of what I would do or say. I might do or say this, but I have to be thinking, will that organization do or say this? So with Transformational Leadership Consulting Services, I get to be my authentic self. I get to make the decision as to whether we're going to say this or do that, or how we're going to meet people where they are. And it all started in 2017 when I met a colleague of mine who asked me, had I ever thought about business? And I was like, no. And it's kind of sort of similar. And that's another story with my PhD, how I got there. Maybe that's another story for another time. But have you ever thought about business? And I was like, no. And then my colleague was like, well, if you ever think about it, I'll help you get it started. And I was like, it might be something good. And so then in 2017, a colleague of mine helped me develop the business part of, Transformational Leadership Consulting Services. And it literally sat there with nothing because I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. And then I got this $800 bill. I was like, wait, I didn't do nothing. Why am I being billed? I didn't realize that you still had to pay whatever it is, the business taxes or business, like fees that you pay.
LLC.
Yeah, like year. You have to pay every year whether you do anything. So that, and then what really kind of kickstarted me even getting contracts and things like that is the Quantum 10, the framework. So I'll go into a little bit of that if it's okay for me to say that when I developed the framework, it was right before the pandemic. And I was featured in Dr. Katie Novak's webinar with Dr. Katie Novak, Gratitude and Thanks Forever to Dr. Katie Novak. She featured me in a webinar. And so with the information from the Quantum 10 framework, my idea was to be like, here, free world, take this framework and use it and work in tandem and integrate the practices. But people wanted to know how, right? How do we intentionally integrate these practices? And so someone in the audience that day, 5 years ago, says, why don't you do a conference? And I was like, yeah, Katie, do a conference. And she was like, no, they're talking to you because it's your framework. I was like, oh, yeah. So that year I was challenged to do the conference in 2020 and it jump started. And it's actually what has really spun to have transformational leadership more recognized as a leading, consultancy firm. I think people know more about Q10 than they do about TLCS, which I call it, Transformational Leadership Consulting Services. And so this year is the year that I want people to really know more about what Transformational Leadership Consulting Services is about.
The Identity Talk for Educators Live podcast is just one piece of the work that we do under Identity Talk Consulting, which we've had since 2019. And since then, we've had the privilege of working with 40 different schools, districts, and organizations across the globe. And we want to continue to add to that number in this new year. So if you are a school, if you're an educator or an organization that's looking to receive professional development and consulting services within any of our pillars, whether it's anti-bias, anti-racist practices, culturally responsive teaching, or identity affirming education, we are the firm for you. And we love to learn more about your needs. When you have a chance, make sure you go to our website at IdentityTalk4Educators.com to learn more about our services and to schedule a discovery call today. We love to hear from you. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's how I got to learn more about your work. It was through Q10, being at the conferences, presenting at the conferences, and then from there, I started learning about transformational leadership consulting services. So I'm glad that you mentioned that intentionality around making sure that we're centering the consultancy part, because I feel like that's something that can sometimes get lost in translation. And I know for me, I've had my consultancy at IDTALK Consulting since 2019.
Oh, wow.
But when most people talk to me, they just see the podcast.
Oh.
See what I mean?
Yes.
So it's like they don't realize, no, like I've actually been a teacher. I've taught in the classroom. I was a math teacher at middle school level for 10 years, held many leadership positions as a teacher leader, and also has consulted with different districts and different organizations over the past 5 years. So sometimes you got to remind people, and it all comes down to the messaging and how you go about doing that.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, and I'm glad that you get a chance to constantly talk about your expertise and the things that you bring still to education and everything. And I'm grateful that you invited me to be on and to talk more about transformational leadership consulting services, because again, through the conference, that's how I know you. And I will put a plug in for you to say that your session was very well attended, and it was really interesting because it was an in-person conference, but you were the only virtual speaker that we had, and we still had people in your session. So yeah, so that speaks a lot to your knowledge, your background, and the things that you brought to the conference. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that. It's always an honor to speak at the Q10 conference.
December 11th and 12th for next year. So hopefully you can get there in person. And if not, we'll bring you in online again.
Yeah. I'm always down for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there are a few more questions I do want to ask before we wrap up.
Okay.
Oh, here's one. So we've been talking a lot about leadership. And one thing I always wonder about leaders is, when did they realize that they were leaders? Because sometimes before you become an official leader in your organization, somebody has to come and tell you, you will make a good X, Y, and Z. And I know that was the case for me. Like, Kwame, you should be a principal. You'd make a good principal. I don't really desire to be a principal. But they tell you, I want you to be a principal, or you have the qualities and the potential. So I'm wondering for you, what was that moment for you when you realized that, I am a leader. I can do this and galvanize people and have influence?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because it really took me back to a specific moment where I realized that I could do more than I was doing. So I was actually working at a high school campus as an activities director. So I was a quasi administrator. They would use me sometimes as a sub kind of leader. Like, you're on the campus, but like when they wanted to have someone help with discipline, or they wanted to have someone help with something, they would use me in that capacity, which was cool. And so I remember working as the activities director, and I was working, getting things done, making things happen. And then there was a new leadership team that had actually swept through kind of, and they came in, and it was so great because it was a team of women, right? And then there were women of color, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And this was actually before I started working on my doctorate, but I had already had a master's degree, and I was literally just sitting on it, because most of us really don't get master's degrees only just to learn more. I know that at the time that I was getting a master's, it wasn't about learning more. It was more about moving over on the pay scale. That all shifted, of course, when I started working on my PhD, because I was like, I want to know more about the community I serve. But when I was getting my master's, I was like, I don't know what I would use it for, but I do want to move over from the pay scale. So I was sitting on this master's degree, and then I was sitting in this leadership team meeting, and the principal says, hey, I want all of your opinion on X, Y, Z, whatever she said. And so as I was about to say what I was going to say, one of her vice principals was like, oh, well, we know exactly what we're going to do. We don't need any more information from, Talisa, pretty much. And it was kind of shutting me down. I was like, So I just sat there, and I was like, because I'm really not a competitive person. Sometimes I play competitive, but the reality is, if you want it and you need it that bad, I'll usually just be like, okay, yeah, because I can create something different, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of sat quietly, and then the person got up really quick and moved around or left the room or something. And so then the principal circled back and was like, oh, Talisa, we didn't hear from you. I said, well, your your team, one of your team members said they didn't need any more information from me, and they specifically said that they didn't need my input. So I didn't know if you wanted or not. Or she was like, oh, no, we want it. I said, okay. And so in that moment, I really felt like the principal wanted to hear from me, but the rest of the team really didn't. And it made me think like, okay, what could you be using your admin for? You could be making an influence. You could be making an impact. You can move forward and you could do things. You can make things happen. And I didn't realize that team didn't actually even know I had a master's degree at the time, because then I started to pursue leadership positions. I started to pursue vice principal positions. And then when I was hired, that same individual that was like, oh, we don't need her input, said, oh my gosh, I didn't know you had a master's degree. I said, oh yeah, I've had it for a while. I just wasn't really utilizing it. I have an admin credential as well. And she was like, oh my gosh, we could be friends. And in my mind, I was like, we could be friends because I have sorry, this is me reliving my trauma.
Yeah.
and it's just coming out naturally because you asked me. But I knew in those moments that I can make an impact. And I knew that like sitting in at a teacher's role, even though teachers are extremely important to the process, we have to have amazing teachers. For me at that moment, I knew that in order to make any more influence and to make more of an impact, that I needed to get into a higher position. That was the moment for me.
Yeah, and also believe too that even without the title, you can still have influence.
Yes.
And that story that you shared is a prime example of what leadership can look like.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, for sure. So just thinking about your journey, 20 plus years of leading different schools and different organizations and galvanizing educators.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel at peace with where you are, being a Black woman in educational leadership? Are there certain things that you're still exploring about yourself?
Yes, and yes. I am happy with where I am. There are still things that I'm exploring about myself. I want to mention an op-ed that I wrote called, I forgot the name of it, but anyway, it was, something about the glass ceiling, but I are navigating glass fixtures or something to that nature. I mentioned that specifically as you talked about being a Black woman in this particular role. We often get in spaces where they will put us in, and I don't want to say put us in, there's an expectation for Black women to be a superhero or a supersized hero to like fix everything, endure all the pressures of whatever's happening in the world and still come out with no scars and no battle wounds. It's unrealistic. And I want to say, and then the support isn't there because there's this thought process that we can handle it all and that we don't necessarily need that level of support. Well, we need just as much support, if not more, because there are spaces that we are navigating that's very different from, shattering the glass barriers. Thank you.
Yes.
You're brilliant. But anyway, yes. And so it's really I really am going to expand on this, and I'm going to expand on it one day. But I talk about the glass ceiling, the glass floor, or the glass walls, actually, and then the glass cliff, which many of us haven't heard about. And a lot of times they'll put a Black in a position of a high level position, and then the supports are not there to ensure her success. And then it looks as if she's incapable, which is not the case. It's just that this person may not have all of the resources that you would offer to other individuals. And so we end up in a position where they end up telling us that, well, you're not quite making it or cutting it or whatever. And so then we get pushed off that glass cliff, right? So although I'm happy with where I am and I'm happy about the experiences that I have endured and encountered, because then it's going to help me to help others, and not just Black women, but other people in general, to navigate certain spaces where there's not enough support, where the leadership isn't as qualified as they should be in order to be able to provide the levels of support that's necessary. So those types of things. So I look forward to the opportunity to share my experiences, not so that I can be like coddled or catered to, but so that other individuals can learn how to navigate those tough spaces. So yeah, so thank you.
Of course. And listen, those who are watching or listening, make sure you check out Dr. Talisa's op-ed, Shattering Glass Barriers, Navigating the Leadership Space. Looks like a phenomenal piece, especially if you are someone who's pursuing educational leadership or you are currently in that position, make sure you give it a read. And as I'm thinking about glass barriers and glass ceilings, I think it's more of a reason why it's important for us to think more about creating our own spaces where we don't have to deal with the challenges of not having resources. Because I think about what's happened post-pandemic, thinking about what happened in 2020 when George Floyd happened and you saw a huge increase of DEI positions, DEI director positions, DEI coordinator positions that were just popping up across different school districts and schools. And then as time went on, you saw more and more people who are in those positions, most of whom were Black women, getting fired or getting terminated or pushed out because there was public resistance or there was some internal things going on that forced those candidates from continuing on with the job. So yeah, it's definitely something that we need to think about, especially now.
Yes, for sure. I'm like reminiscing and processing and thinking back on that year, and knowing not even just that year, but from then until now, many of the individuals that I know that have been pushed out of even not even just those positions, but any positions that are working with marginalized youth are experiencing it. And the ones that I know are mainly like Black women. I haven't heard of many Black men, but also other women, white women, anyone that's working towards leveling that playing field that we talk about, chopping block, because people want us, they want status sometimes. They want status quo. Society is shifting. You know, people have a different mindset of why it's shifting. If it's shifting because of, you know, we have a difference in the makeup of our society, I think that's okay. You know, but some people think, nope, we got to keep it to where it's been. You know, there's been a certain individual, like type of individual that has run public education or the government or whatever the case may be for so many years. We want to keep it that way. So we're working towards leveling that playing field and giving everyone an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely need to do that. So as we wrap up, I do want to ask this final question.
Okay.
And it's the one that I ask everybody. How do you continue to stay true to the teacher in you?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I continue to pour into other individuals. I continue to be a servant leader because teachers are servant leaders. I continue to learn. I continue to listen. So, and to continue to just be human-centered, to ensure that we provide resources for our students, for our staff, for those individuals that are looking to grow and learn in society and continue to learn and grow in society ourselves. Always be a learner, listener, watcher. I pay attention to details. So I continue to stay true to the teacher in me by ensuring I also professionally develop, professionally learn, go to professional learning opportunities. If an organization that I work with or for isn't offering those opportunities, I will invest in those opportunities myself so that I can stay current on best practices for the students that we serve in this moment. Because our students are ever changing. And if we're not ever changing with our students, then we're also contributing to the status quo. So that's how I stay true to the teacher in me.
There it is, y'all. And we're going to end it like that. Dr. Talisa, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you for everything that you do and continue to do. And before you leave, please let people know how they can connect with you on social media. You could also plug in Transformational Leadership Educational Consulting services and let people know the services that you are providing currently.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you can reach me by email at talisa.sullivan@transformingleaders.tlc.com. And you can also reach me by going to the website, www.transformingleaders.tlc.com. You can reach me. Yeah, those are some ways to reach me. I also want to put a shameless plug in for the Q10 conference, the Quantum 10 conference coming up at the end of this year. Save the date. I can definitely send you out. Maybe you can send it out to your listeners. The save the date, it's on the website at q10equityandeducation.com. They can pull that up and they can actually take a look and see when the dates are. So there are many ways to connect with me. I'm excited. The services that we provide coaching, coaching for leaders, for teacher leaders, for principals. We provide professional learning opportunities in culturally responsive practices, trauma-informed practices. If you look at all the elements, we provide the intentional integration of all of the practices. So those are some of the services that we provide. I also do keynote speaking. I've done several keynote speeches across the nation, I'll say, and hopeful to be out of the country. If there's anyone out of the country that's looking for a dynamic speaker that can speak to many different topics in public education, those are some of the services that we offer at Transformational Leadership Consulting Services.
All right. So you heard it from Dr. Talisa herself. Make sure you connect with her. We'll have all of her information in the episode notes. And that's going to be a wrap for all of us here at IDTALK for Educators Live. I thank you all for tuning in again. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.